Hello, everybody. I'm Gareth. Welcome along to Somewhere on Earth. It's Tuesday, the 28th of May, 2024. And with us today is technology and business journalist Angelica Mari, also entrepreneur and academic, joining us from Sao Paulo, we assume, unless you're online from somewhere else. Where are you, Angelica?
Hi, Gareth. Lovely to be with you again. In downtown São Paulo. Is a little bit rainy out there. And I think the weather in London is pretty similar today. Minus 10 degrees perhaps. But yeah, I'm in São Paulo right now.
Yeah, right. That's thanks for clarifying that. Across the hemispheres, united by the rain and the puddles. But as we say in the UK, it's jolly good for the garden. Right. Anyway, a little while ago, Angelica, we were talking about, it may not have been on an Angelica podcast, but certainly the podcast was talking about digital government and filling in online forms. Well, I can't remember if that was one of yours. It might have been one of Galen's. But don't worry, I'm not going to pick you up on that programme and ask you all about it, because you may not have been in it. But reminding you and the listener, this was a little while ago, we talked about digital government and, of course, forms, the little things that we fill in online. That's our way of interfacing with so many government services. And my initial thought going into this story is, how interesting can forms be? You know, they're the bane of all our lives. We all hate filling them out. They're really tedious things. But my goodness, we had such a fascinating conversation just about how you design these forms, all the different theories about how you structure the form and the questions in the right way, how you try and get the maximum amount out of an interaction with a client or somebody online trying to get a government service, how you get as much value as you can out of that transaction without, with the minimum number of words, with the minimum number of questions and boxes to fill on a form. So that's where we were, Angelica, and you may have your own views about filling in forms. Is there a lot of e-government in where you are, and where you fill in lots of online forms to get your driver's license or to register a business, that kind of thing? Or
Yeah, in fact, Brazil is seen as one of the most advanced countries in the world in terms of e-government. We advanced quite a lot during the pandemic, as many countries have, but we shifted a lot of the physical government services to the digital space. And more importantly, we managed to get, the government managed to get people to use them. But it was not a trivial process, right? A lot of physical government spaces had to close in order to force people into doing that. And it is directly connected to meaningful internet access, which we will discuss later on. But yes, we have advanced quite a lot.
Okay, and I'm sure that's the case in many countries. The pandemic drove so much of this in many places, I can imagine, certainly did in the UK. And of course, we might all whinge and complain about having to fill in these online forms, but on the other hand, it might be better than having to go all the way to your local post office or bureaucratic centre and wait behind 30 different people before you get to speak to a human being. But then on the other hand, there is a human being at the end of it. I don't know. Just arguments for and against. Just really briefly, though, let's have this one from listener Jennifer, who enjoyed the interview and enjoyed that item, said that she has to spend a lot of time filling out and processing forms. She said that interview really got my attention. She says there's still a lot of work to do in the USA. There's still a way to go. And Jennifer says, when the item mentioned taxes, this is Jennifer talking, not me, says Jennifer, gave myself a virtual pat on the back. I was driving at the time. So this is a virtual pat on the back. So both hands firmly on the wheel. Jennifer says, because I managed to file both federal and state taxes online this year on the government websites, which means I didn't have to pay money for one of the companies that offers tax preparation software to do it for me. Finally, says Jennifer, we need to make people more aware of what they can do online. I've stood in long lines at the post office watching fellow customers on their cell phones. Many times, that's all that's needed for a change of address. Just get onto your mobile phone. So a few thoughts there from Jennifer, but on that tax form filling in online e-government interaction bombshell. Angelica, should we move on?
Yeah, but I would just say before we move on that you have to offer people options. You can't just say that everyone is able to do that, because we have parts of the population which don't have access to the hardware or have the skills to do these things. So we have to offer people options.
Sure, yep. I think of my, what is she now, 84 or 85-year-old mother who, does struggle. She does pretty well on her tablet computer, but some things are just too complicated for her, and she would rather actually just queue up and speak to a person and go through it with them, or wait until I come home and help her out with it, which is usually the thing. Okay, in fine form-filling tradition, we could carry on talking about this, tick box B if you think we need to move on, or box C if that's enough for a podcast and we can call it a day. You've clicked box B. That means we'll move on. Here we go. And coming up today, we delve into our sense of self in this edition, asking big questions about where we are in this here information revolution, or whatever you want to call it. Whatever it is, what is this revolution? Well, the question really is the extent to which the technology is shaping us. But then should we be asking if we're shaping the technology? Now, to work that out, then we need to ask some very deep questions about who and what we are and what we want. And only then can we address the bigger question: is technology really the problem? Now, all of this is rehearsed in a new book. Its author is right here, poised and ready to speak to us. Also, today we're going to talk about connectivity and the country that's approaching the internet for everyone, getting everyone online, yet connectivity, for many, well, it's still not that good. And we're discussing it all right here on the Somewhere on Earth podcast. We don't have a shrinking sense of who we are because of personalising technology. We have personalising technology because of our shrinking sense of who we are. That's one phrase that stood out for me from Timandra Harkness's new book, Technology is Not the Problem. The clue to the book's further conclusion is very much in that title, which I guess is the whole point of a title. Yes, technology is not the problem. We're the ones, after all, who have chosen to be profiled, who rather like it when things are tailored to us, and who are prepared to be nudged, indeed quite possibly often shoved, in whatever direction the algorithms take us. And anyway, humanity wrote those algorithms, or at least the code that wrote that code. This is getting very meta, isn't it? Anyway, I hope I've summed that up okay. Let's find out from Timandra herself. She's a broadcaster, statistician, mathematician, and it says here on her homepage, a lapsed comedian. Oh, and she gives radio interviews. This is one. Hello, Timandra. Thanks for being with us.
Hello, Gareth and Angelica. Nice to be here.
Good to have you on. So I don't know in that introduction if I even came close to summing up what this book is all about. I got into the whole thing about the algorithms that are written by the algorithms and where does the human come in. Maybe another way of just starting this interview is to say, why did you want to write this book?
Well, the weird thing is, I think you summed it up very well, but I kind of started writing a slightly different book. I started writing a book that was much more about the technology, because I'd previously written a book about big data. And I was really interested in this way that technology gathers data about each of us and builds a profile from the data and then targets that profile with adverts or personalised services or whatever. But the more I looked at it, the more I thought, but I kind of want to ask a different question. I want to ask why we have this technology and not other technology. Because 10 years ago, I would have said, we don't really know about this data gathering, and if we knew, we wouldn't go along with it. But now I think most people have a pretty good idea that our data is collected and we're profiled. And we have this weird ambivalence, like we find it creepy, but we also hate it when it gets it wrong. And so I thought, I think actually we kind of like it. So what is it about us that makes this so attractive, this world in which each of us is the centre of our own digital universe, and increasingly like our own universe in the real, the offline world, because in the offline world as well, things are tailored to us as individuals, although perhaps not that personally. I mean, if we talk about how the technology does it, it doesn't feel as personal as perhaps they'd like it to.
Yeah, there's a bit of irony there in a sense, isn't it? That it's the technology, this thing that we think of as being rather cold, might be actually more, and is more effective in many ways at discerning what we really want than a human being, for instance, in a restaurant doing their very best to make sure they put exactly the right amount of salt on our food.
Well, yes and no. I mean, in a sense, I always say it's not that the technology knows you better than you know yourself, but it has more data on you. So in that kind of sense, yes, I think it can be alarmingly accurate and pick up on things that we're not even aware of, like our daily habits. Like someone was saying to me the other day that their phone kind of says, oh, well, usually at this time of the morning you do this. Do you want to do this? It's like, well, that's a bit... I never really noticed that, but yeah, go on.
I'm with you, Timandra. I think a lot of people find comfort in, for example, being profiled because it sort of provides a sense they're being understood and catered to. But I'm thinking that it can also create sort of echo chambers where our beliefs are being like sort of reinforced rather than challenged. And that can also limit our exposure to different things, different points of view, experience, and so on. What's your take on that?
Well, yes. I mean, that does worry me that if an algorithm has profiled me and says, this is the kind of person you are, and we're going to feed you things targeted at that kind of person, then you lose the chance to discover new things and maybe to be stretched and maybe to become a different kind of person. But the echo chamber thing particularly is very interesting. So I talked to Chris Bale, who runs the polarization lab at Duke University, and he and his lab did some research because he thought, echo chambers are a big problem on social media, and this is why I and my liberal friends were completely surprised when America voted for Trump, because we didn't know anybody who voted for Trump, but obviously we were in an echo chamber. But when they did research and they tried taking people out of their echo chambers online and kind of exposing them to different views, it didn't have the effect they expected. They thought that it would make people change their mind a bit, but in fact people doubled down and became very defensive. So he decided that the echo chamber theory wasn't quite right, that what's actually happening when we interact on social media is we're not trying to engage with ideas, we're trying to build and project our identities. And therefore, when somebody comes along and disagrees with us, then we feel that as an attack on the group that we identify with. And so we react in a hostile way. Well, I mean, he's quite positive. He says there are other ways. If you get people to interact in different ways on different platforms, maybe you can overcome that, because in many cases we're not as far apart as we think. We perceive the other side to be really different from us and really hostile to us. But actually, if you ask people what they think about particular issues, often we don't disagree as much as we think we do. But I found that really interesting, because I would have said, echo chambers are an aspect of this, everything is personalised to you. But that wasn't what they found. And this was another thing that led me to the idea that it's the urge to project your own identity and have it reflected back to you that drives this desire to be understood and recognised. And I think you're exactly right about that.
Yeah, you talk about your own experiences, many of which we'll identify with, I'm sure. But certain platforms, for instance, thinking you're a man, and they're pushing you ads for beard trimmers. And the last time I looked, Timandra, you definitely don't have a beard.
I don't.
And of course, in a way, that's depending on how you take it. But you obviously found that quite amusing. But on the other hand, you said when they associated you with the wrong football team, that really genuinely made you furious. And at the same time, like an ad might just persuade you to buy this kind of biscuit over the next one. But you're a grown human adult. You're not going to change your voting behaviour just because of something that's been pushed at you by some algorithm that's trying to profile you from a political campaign.
Well, exactly. I mean, I thought the beard trimmers was quite a good example, because however much Twitter thinks I'm a man, or X now, and advertises beard products to me, I'm not a man. I don't have a beard, so I'm not going to buy them. And I'm definitely not going to buy Aston Villa football strip. But I made myself laugh, because The whole, like, we think you're a man thing, just I found amusing. But when they got the football team wrong, I was, as you say, furious. So it's that does kind of reflect, I think, how some things really matter to us about whether even the algorithms get us wrong. I mean, do you think it's kind of weird that why would we care whether an algorithm gets us right or wrong? It's only a machine. But it's so knitted in now to our social world that we kind of do care.
And probably because we know that algorithm's being fed by a load of data from us. So maybe it makes us worry about the data that we're feeding into the machine. And then we think, well, maybe it's just my patterns of behavior and my opinions and everything about me that is that data that's going into the algorithm. And now it's been reflected back on me, and almost like looking at yourself in the mirror on a very bad hair day or bad beard day, as I sometimes have, and just thinking this is terrible.
Yes. Well, I think that's it, is that we have the idea, which I don't think is really strictly true, but we do have the idea that the algorithms are kind of objective, that they see us, as we really are, especially when it's based on our own behaviour. It's like, well, but this is true because it just looks at what I actually do and what I post in an unguarded moment. So it must know what I'm really like, which I don't think is really true, but we do kind of think of it that way. I think we still have this slight reverence for the technology, as if it's an oracle, as if it somehow knows more about us than other people
because
do.
it's technology, right? So it must be right. Yeah, no, sure. But to give a sense of how deep you've gone in this book, you spend a lot of time in the book thinking very hard about what we mean by self. And so you end up with a whole, like, post-Enlightenment and even pre-Enlightenment philosophy. You talk about Immanuel Kant, of course, the idea that we're not merely the means to other people's ends. Maybe a self-evident question in a way, but why did it matter to you so much, Timandra, in asking questions about technology? Why did it matter to you to spend so long thinking about the self?
I think I was worried that one of the things that happens when we increasingly give over decision-making to technology, and even the decisions that we do make, instead of us just going out to the world and saying, right, what are my goals? What am I wanting to do? How am I going to go about this? We increasingly can choose from menus that are pre-selected for us. And I worry that was taking away our agency, our sense of ourselves as subjects, if you like, or that the self is something that makes things happen in the world. As opposed to just a kind of something that passively experiences the world. And so I went back and I thought, this idea of ourselves as identities, primarily, as that the most important thing is that you project who you are and people recognise you and see you the way that you see yourself, is quite a recent way of thinking about ourselves, really. I mean, I was thinking recently, and I thought, 1,000 years ago, nobody had an identity, but we all had an immortal soul. And it's a very different way of thinking about ourselves in the world. And I think it affects how you see yourself and what you think you can do. So I wanted to go back and kind of dig into that and say, where did this idea come from? Because it's a kind of weird, contradictory idea. On the one hand, you go, well, my identity is authentically me. It's my inner kernel. It's my essence. And that's why it's so important that I should live it authentically. But then in another way, it's something that has to be out there in the world that I maybe create or perform even, that other people should respond to. So it's a very complicated idea, I think.
So the point you're getting at in the book, Timandra, is that we sort of need to assert our autonomy and kind of resist being reduced to data points for other people's purposes or the purposes of organizations. But I wanted to ask you, to what extent do you believe that's actually possible?
Well, I think it is possible. But we have to want to do it, is the first thing. I think, one thing is, if we say, oh no, it's impossible because the technology is too powerful, then you've kind of given up already. It's like, as soon as you say it's not possible, then it's not possible because you've decided that you're incapable of it. But the other thing that's really hard, I think, is that it's not something you can do as an individual, because part of the reason why I think we feel so fragile and we need the constant reassurance from the technology of who we are is that we're much more isolated than, say, our grandparents were. We're not embedded in social networks. Like we're much more free to move away from where our families live and do a new kind of job maybe that nobody in our family's done before. And that in one way is very liberating. I mean, I think it's a very positive thing in some ways that we can choose how to live. But in another way, it does leave us more exposed and, more insecure. And so I think one way that we need to get back our sense of autonomy is that we actually need each other. We need to build stronger social networks within which we can be free and autonomous. I know that sounds contradictory, because part of having become as free as we are is like extracting ourselves from tradition and hierarchy and rigid social networks. But I think this being on our own out there and you're free to be whoever you want means that we're like, okay, but if I'm free to be whoever I want, then this feels a bit arbitrary. I can be this person, but I could just as easily have been different. And so how do I really know who I am?
Yeah, and I think you ask us to be bold, really, not to be afraid of that, which I know is all very well to say, but just don't be afraid, put yourself out there, perhaps go outside the comfort zone a little bit, and ultimately some kind of freedom and unshackling from the machine may result, if I might paraphrase you. Just briefly, Timandra, before we end.
Yes, I think that's put very well, actually. And take risks. I think freedom is risky, and I think that's one of the appeals also of the technology, that it promises a much safer world, but it's a flatter, thinner, more restrictive world.
Absolutely. Yeah. And to do nothing is a risk in itself, a risk of missing out on something better.
Absolutely. The risk of missing out on infinite possibilities.
That's sure even an acronym, isn't it? FOMO.
Yes.
Something.
Welcome to my life. Well, apparently everyone else gets FOMO, and I just felt left out, so I thought I'd better have some as well. All right. Timandra, let's have a bit more from you in the subscriber extra version of this podcast. But for now, thank you very much indeed. That's Timandra Harkness, who is the author of the new book, Technology is Not the Problem. It's pre-record Gareth here, interrupting the live Gareth with an important message. Yeah, they're just playing this in to give me a rest. Aren't they clever? And the message is, please subscribe to the extended version of this podcast, won't you? It's where the guests often relax. I get to wing it a bit and we find out more about people's work and their lives. It's $10 a month. Most podcatchers open up the subscription content if you just click on the padlock or something. Or you can go to somewhereonearth.co, press the big button on the left-hand side to subscribe, or the big button on the right to donate. You can opt out at any time, and because we know it's so easy to cancel, we really do try to make it good. No filler, just a bit of extra bonus content to make your and our day. Well, here's a question then. How does a country end up in this position? It's close to having universal internet access for all, yet most of the population has poor connectivity. Well, Brazil seems to be in that situation. 84% of people are connected in Brazil, hurrah, but only a fifth of them really have what you might call a decent connection. The finding comes from a report by Brazil's Regional Centre for Studies for the Development of the Information Society. So the acronym, if you like, is cetic.br or CETIC. Should I say that as CETIC? Angelica, you know this, or cetic.br. Cetic.br. Okay, I think people got that. Cetic.br. As I say, that's the Regional Centre for the Studies for the Development of the Information Society, and it's linked to Brazil's Internet Steering Committee. And we'd better unpick a bit of this nomenclature just before we crack on, Angelica. So the Internet Steering Committee, is that part of the government then, is it, or something? Steering internet policy, or is it an academic body? Or
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
AI is changing the game of business. Will you be on the winning team? I'm Jordan Wilson, the host of the Everyday AI podcast, and your coach to help you learn the X's and O's of AI. Artificial intelligence isn't just a new player in the game, it's a new sport altogether. So if you don't quickly put AI into play, your competitors will run up the score. I've spent my whole life building winning teams, from coaching basketball to working with big players like Nike and Jordan Brand. My next move? Helping you win with Everyday AI. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or on everydayaipodcast.com. Let's tap into AI together and put points on the board.
Yeah, it's an official body, but it functions out of government.
Right. Okay. So it's come up with this report that says some very interesting things about the quality, or maybe lack of, in many cases, the quality of connectivity for people in Brazil. So can you pick up on this and perhaps give a sense of why these numbers are relevant and so interesting?
Well, it's easy to assume that Brazil is highly connected. Just because the use of penetration of smartphones, for example, is so widespread. We have more phones than people in this country. And there are lots of studies that show the popularity of social media. For example, Brazil is always high up there in rankings of digital adoption and uptake of any kind of digital tool, right? But what the study shows is that this impression is kind of misleading. And it found that many Brazilians, in fact, struggle with slow internet speeds, unreliable connections, and lack of digital skills. And the study also found out, very interestingly, Gareth, that if you are poor, black, and you're a woman, you are more likely to have internet access that's not good enough. And so to encapsulate all these challenges, this study came up with the concept of meaningful connectivity. So that's internet access that should enable a satisfactory use of online services, whatever they are, and enable people to sort of seize all the opportunities of the digital economy. So they've used 9 indicators to define this, including cost of household internet, mobile plan, if you have one, how many devices or computers you have in a home, and connection speed, frequency of internet use, and so on, to sort of arrive at this concept of what's good enough internet access. So I've asked Graziella Castello, who's research coordinator at CETIC.br, about what specific policies can the Brazilian government implement to improve meaningful connectivity, especially in financially and geographically disadvantaged regions.
Em 2 dimensões de políticas simultâneas, né? As políticas em escala, que vão conseguir garantir qualidade de acesso a um custo razoável para o orçamento familiar.
I believe the first crucial step is always relying on science. Diagnoses like the ones we just published are fundamental to ensure that we are monitoring the population's connectivity. By publishing data every year on connectivity, it will allow the authorities to develop state policies to improve connectivity. These can be monitored to see how effective they are. As technological advancements continue to demand more bandwidth and varied device usage, our social and work lives are increasingly affected if we don't have good connectivity. With the rapid emergence of disruptive technologies like artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, it is essential to continuously monitor and improve connectivity conditions. This ensures that new issues, themes, and demands are addressed, considering the broad impacts of technological progress on social life and the country's economy, especially for each individual. By doing this, we can help mitigate these inequalities that are exacerbated in the country.
I was also interested in learning how Brazil can develop a long-term strategy to ensure equitable access and use that can accompany the tech advancements in areas like connectivity to prevent the digital gap from worsening in the future.
A peça número 1 é contar sempre com a ciência para esse olhar, né? Então, diagnósticos como esse que foram publicados são fundamentais para garantir esse acompanhamento.
When you have an event of incredible magnitude like this, regardless of the causes, you can already see the immediate effects of the catastrophe, including on the connectivity gap faced by these individuals. We don't have precise data at this moment on the immediate effect of the floods, especially on individuals. Now, it's important to understand that society is made up of individuals who are susceptible to different issues, whether environmental, economic or social, and that things can change very quickly. This reinforces the importance of continuous monitoring of internet connectivity. The data from 2024 will likely show a gap or absence of data because there is even a problem of how to collect data now after the floods. It's vital that data is collected every year to see if connectivity is improving. This population cannot recover without adequate access to the internet. We have to ensure that people have food, and that food meets minimum nutritional standards. I think the same applies to internet access. It's not enough to have access. It must meet minimum standards to ensure that this access provides the benefits and opportunities that the web offers.
Graziella also told me how the lack of good enough internet access can actually worsen in terms of impacts on people, especially in the context like the current climate disaster that we're seeing with the floods in the south of the country.
Quando você tem evento desse, né, assim, de magnitude incrível e tal, independente dos
we need
motivos
to think
que os
of
causem,
policies
né,
that will ensure quality access, access at a reasonable cost for family budgets, and access to devices that are suitable for people's uses, and access that guarantees usage where and when people want it. At the same time, we need overlap-targeted policies for the most vulnerable groups, because they are already at a greater disadvantage. It is crucial to provide targeted incentives such as subsidies for those facing cost barriers, alongside policies to improve internet usage skills. Collaboration with the private sector, including small and commercial providers, can address significant connectivity issues. Ensuring quality access with adequate speed and affordable plans is essential, but policies must also focus on developing digital skills. Merely enabling access is not enough. It is necessary to equip users with skills and create a positive feedback loop. Combining national, state and municipal strategies can more effectively address connectivity bottlenecks, ensuring equitable access for disadvantaged groups. The study highlights the urgent need for coordinated policies by state bodies, the private sector and civil society to address regional needs and get the most disadvantaged connected.
So that's Graziella Castello, who's the research coordinator at ctic.br. Right, so finally, people are hearing this case in Brazil and possibly wondering, well, what does that mean for my life if I live outside Brazil? So what relevance does this have outside, beyond your borders, Angelica?
I guess that for people living outside Brazil, this study, these findings, they're quite novel because you talk about internet access, but you have to evolve this conversation. And I think this study illustrates that. It's showing the importance of talking about not only internet access, but the quality, the effectiveness of that access. And I guess it also shows that even with high smartphone penetration and social media use, which is the case in Brazil, real digital inclusion really is about addressing other dimensions of connectivity. And that's so that we can ensure, like we were saying just now, that everyone can benefit from all these opportunities online.
And there we'll leave it. Thank you very much indeed, Angelica. So that'll do for this edition. If you want to find us on the webs, then on most platforms, if you do some kind of variant of Somewhere on Earth Productions or Somewhere on Earth Podcast or SOEP or Soap Tech, but I'm sure if you're listening to this, you're clever enough to search for things and we're quite easy to find. That's all I'm saying. But when you have found us, please follow us, please like us, please interact, engage. Somehow it makes our figures look good, and it also folds what you have to say into our program, and we include it in our content, and then we're all part of some great big lovely club as well. So thank you for that, dear listener. So what else can I tell you? The audio today has been done by Keziah. The production managing is done by Liz. We're going to have more from Timandra and Angelica in the subscription extra. The producer is Anya. It's all happening here at Lanson's Team Farner in London, and I'm Gareth. Thanks for listening. Bye-bye.